In the neon-drenched streets of post-war New York, a different kind of power was consolidating. The decade from 1940 to 1950 wasn't just about rebuilding a nation. It was the golden age of the American Mafia. 5 families, a council of shadows, held the city in their grip. This is the story of who truly ran New York. The Commission, an underworld government established by Lucky Luciano, was meant to prevent all-out war. But with Luciano deported, a power vacuum emerged. The Genovese family, under the de facto leadership of Vito Genovese, flexed its muscle from the docks to the unions. Meanwhile, the Mangano family, with the fearsome Albert Anastasia as its underboss, controlled the waterfront with an iron fist, their enforcement arm known as Murder, Inc. The Bonanno family, led by the astute Joe Bonanno, expanded its empire into gambling and loan sharking, operating with a level of secrecy that frustrated law enforcement. The Lucchese family, under Tommy Lucchese and the Colombo family, were masters of labor racketeering, siphoning millions from construction and trucking. They weren't just thugs, they were CEOs of crime. Frank Costello, the Prime Minister of the underworld, held court in the city's finest hotels, blurring the lines between crime and politics. Power wasn't just about guns. It was about influence, about knowing who to bribe, who to threaten, and when to make a man disappear. From 1940 to 1950, these 5 families were more than gangs. They were the secret government of New York City, and their bosses were its true kings. The 1950s, a decade of paranoia, prosperity, and a seismic shift in the New York underworld. The old guard was fading, and a new, more brutal generation craved the throne. The 5 families still ruled, but their alliances were written in blood, and loyalty was a currency that could expire at any moment. Frank Costello, the Prime Minister, ran his empire from the Waldorf Astoria, a master of political influence. But his reign was challenged by the return of Vito Genovese, a man who believed power was taken, not given. Genovese saw Costello's reliance on diplomacy as weakness. In 1957, the whispers turned into gunshots. A failed assassination attempt on Costello was the message. His time was over. Costello retired, handing the family to Genovese. But Genovese's ambition was not satisfied. To become the boss of all bosses, he needed to eliminate his rivals. His primary target, Albert Anastasia, the head of the Mangano family and the fearsome leader of Murder, Inc. On October 25, 1957, Anastasia was gunned down in a barbershop chair, a hit orchestrated by Genovese and Anastasia's own underboss, Carlo Gambino. With his enemies removed, Genovese called a grand meeting in Appalachian, New York, to solidify his power. It was a catastrophic failure. State police raided the summit, arresting dozens of bosses from across the country and exposing the Mafia's national network to the world. The debacle led directly to Genovese's conviction on narcotics charges. As the decade closed, Genovese was in prison, and the quiet, cunning Carlo Gambino was consolidating power, setting the stage to become the most powerful man in the American Mafia. The 1960s dawned in the wake of the Appalachian disaster, which had shattered the Mafia's secrecy. While Vito Genovese tried to rule from his prison cell, a new, quieter power was consolidating. This was the decade of civil war and the rise of a true king. One boss, Joseph Bonanno, refused to accept the new order. Believing himself the rightful heir to the throne, he plotted to assassinate his main rivals on the commission, including the strategic Carlo Gambino. The plot was discovered. To escape his own death sentence, Bonanno staged his own kidnapping, disappearing for nearly 2 years and igniting a bloody internal conflict known as the Bananas War that tore his family apart. While his rivals were at war, Carlo Gambino played the long game. Understated, cunning, and universally respected, he built his empire not on overt violence, but on strategic alliances and immense influence. He was the chairman of the board, a ghost in the machine. But a new, audacious kind of boss emerged. Joseph Colombo, head of his own family, did the unthinkable. He sought the spotlight. He founded the Italian-American Civil Rights League, holding massive rallies and giving television interviews publicly denying the very existence of the Mafia. To the old guard, it was the ultimate betrayal of their code of silence. As the decade closed, the power structure was radically transformed. Vito Genovese died in prison. Joe Bonanno was defeated and exiled, and Carlo Gambino stood alone at the apex, the undisputed boss of all bosses, his quiet authority absolute. The era of the flamboyant gangster was over, replaced by the silent corporate efficiency of the Gambino machine. The 1970s. The quiet reign of the boss of all bosses, Carlo Gambino, was coming to an end, and the decade would be defined by public assassinations, internal rebellions, and a brazen challenge for the crown. The code of silence was about to be shattered by gunfire. The chaos began in 1971. Joseph Colombo, who had courted the media, was shot in the head at a rally, a public execution that sent shockwaves through the five families. The hit was blamed on rogue gangster Joe Gallo, who was himself gunned down a year later while celebrating his birthday. The streets were descending into open warfare, but the most significant event was the death of Carlo Gambino in 1976. In a move that defied tradition, he bypassed his loyal, feared underboss Agnello Della Croce and named his brother-in-law, the business-minded Paul Castellano, as his successor. This split the powerful Gambino family in two: Castellano's white-collar faction and Della Croce's blue-collar street crews, a deep wound that festered with resentment. Into this power vacuum stepped Carmine the Cigar Galante. Released from prison, the Bonanno family boss declared himself the new boss of all bosses. He ruthlessly monopolized the heroin trade and openly bragged about his power, a direct insult to the commission. His reign was short and bloody. In July 1979, he was assassinated by his own men in the courtyard of a Brooklyn restaurant, a cigar still in his mouth. The commission had spoken. As the decade closed, Castellano sat uneasily on the throne, his authority questioned. And deep within the Bonanno family, an FBI agent named Joseph Pistone, known as Donnie Brasco, was gathering evidence that would soon bring the entire organization to its knees. The 70s weren't an end, but a prelude to the storm. The 1980s, a decade of revolution. The Mafia's corporate era was about to be violently overthrown by a return to street justice, led by a man who craved the spotlight. The government, armed with new laws, saw its chance to dismantle the empire for good. The Gambino family was a kingdom divided. Paul Castellano ruled from his Staten Island mansion, the White House detached from the streets. Below him, a charismatic captain, John Gotti, embodied the old ways. He was a creature of the sidewalk, loved by his men and seething with resentment for his boss. The only thing preventing a civil war was Castellano's underboss, the respected Agnello Della Croce. In 1985, two events sealed Castellano's fate. First, federal prosecutor Rudy Giuliani unleashed the RICO Act, putting the heads of all five families on trial in the historic Mafia Commission case. Second, Della Croce died of cancer. When Castellano disrespected the old warrior by skipping his wake, Gotti saw it as the ultimate betrayal. He had his justification. On December 16, 1985, Gotti's crew gunned down Paul Castellano and his bodyguard outside Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan. It was the most audacious mob hit in decades. Gotti, watching from a car across the street, became the new boss. He was the Dapper Don, a media sensation who graced magazine covers. While Gotti beat multiple charges in court, earning the nickname the Teflon Don, the rest of the mob's leadership was decimated by the commission trial. The Genovese, Lucchese, and Colombo bosses were sentenced to 100 years in prison. As the decade closed, Gotti stood as the most famous gangster in America, but his throne was built on a crumbling foundation. The government was closing in, and the era of the five families was facing its final judgment. The 1990s began with John Gotti on top of the world. He was the celebrity gangster, the Teflon Don, unbeatable in court and the undisputed king of New York's streets. But the foundation of his throne was pure betrayal, and the code he claimed to represent was about to destroy him. The government, frustrated by Gotti's acquittals, found its ultimate weapon, his own underboss, Sammy the Bull Gravano. Facing a lifetime in prison, Gravano did the unthinkable. He broke the sacred code of omertà and agreed to testify. In 1992, the world watched as Gravano calmly detailed Gotti's crimes, including the murder of Paul Castellano. The Teflon was gone. Gotti was sentenced to life without parole, his reign ending not with a bang but with the words of a traitor. While Gotti had sought the spotlight, The era's true power operated in the shadows. Vincent the Chin Gigante, boss of the Genovese family, was the most powerful man in the mafia, and he maintained his power by feigning insanity. For years he wandered Greenwich Village in a bathrobe, avoiding prosecution. The Oddfathers Act finally crumbled in 1997 when he was convicted, proving that even the most brilliant schemes had an expiration date. The decade was marked by self-destruction. The Colombo family tore itself apart in a bloody civil war. As Gotti and Gigante fell, a new breed of boss emerged, learning from their mistakes. Joseph Massino of the Bonanno family operated in complete secrecy, banning his men from even saying his name. He was rebuilding an empire while his rivals' kingdoms burned. As the millennium turned, the New York Mafia was a ghost of its former self. The commission was shattered, its bosses in prison, its code of silence a joke. The age of celebrity gangsters and absolute power was over, replaced by a desperate fight for survival in the shadows. The new millennium began with a ghost on the throne. While Gotti wasted away in prison, Joseph Big Joey Massino, the boss of the Bonanno family, had become the most powerful and secretive don in America. Learning from Gotti's mistakes, he ruled from the shadows, his name never spoken aloud. He was the last don. But the government, armed with a generation of informants, was relentless. In 2004, Massino was convicted of murder and racketeering. Facing the death penalty, he did what was once unimaginable. The last true boss of all bosses became a government witness. He wore a wire in prison to record his own acting boss. The code of omertà was not just broken, it was buried. The old gods were gone. John Gotti died in prison in 2002. Vincent the Chin Gigante followed in 2005. Their deaths weren't met with gunfire and succession wars, but with quiet newspaper obituaries. They were relics of a dead era. Throughout the 2000s and 2010s, the FBI launched massive takedowns, arresting dozens of mobsters at a time in coordinated raids. The mafia's leadership structure was permanently fractured. The five families, Gambino, Genovese, Lucchese, Bonanno, and Colombo, still exist today, but as phantoms. They are smaller, weaker, and their power is a whisper compared to the roar it once was. Leadership is now held by low-profile street panel committees or quiet business-like bosses, like the Genovese family's Liborio Bellomo, who avoid all attention. They still engage in construction, loan sharking, and gambling, but the empire is gone. The streets of New York are no longer theirs. The story of the American Mafia, a century of blood and power, ends not with a king on a throne, but with ghosts in the shadows.